Okay, now let's meditate. Close your eyes. Place your hands in your lap. And think thoughts of goodwill. Goodwill is a wish for happiness, true happiness. And because true happiness comes from within, your true happiness doesn't have to conflict with anyone else's, which is why you can have goodwill for yourself and for all others without any conflict. And you think about how happiness is created. It doesn't come simply from wishing for it. It comes from understanding the causes for happiness and acting on them. So when you're wishing or extending thoughts of goodwill to others, you're hoping that they will understand the causes for true happiness and be willing and able to act on them, which is a thought you can have for anyone, even those who've been behaving very cruelly, thoughtlessly, harmfully. You're basically wishing, not that they be happy doing whatever they're doing, you're wishing that they would change their ways. And that's a thought you can have without any hypocrisy. So start with thoughts of goodwill for yourself. Tell yourself, may I be truly happy. And then extend the same thought to others. Start with people who are close to your heart, your family, your very close friends. May they find true happiness too. And then spread those thoughts out in ever-widening circles to people you know well and like. To people you like even though you don't know them so well. To people you're more neutral about. And to people you don't like. Remember, the world would be a much better place if everyone could find true happiness within. And spread thoughts of goodwill to people you don't even know. And not just people, living beings of all kinds, east, west, north, south, above and below, out to infinity. May we all find true happiness in our hearts. Now focus your attention on your breath. Take a couple of good long, deep in and out breaths. Notice where you feel the breathing process in the body. Focus your attention there. And then ask yourself if long breathing feels good. If it does, you can keep it up. If not, you can change. Make it shorter, faster, slower, heavier, lighter, more shallow. See what rhythm and texture of breathing feels best for the body right now. If your thoughts wander away from the breath, let them go. Don't pay any attention to them. If you do follow them, then as soon as you notice that you follow them, just let them drop. You don't have to finish them, you don't have to complete them. You don't have to tie them up. Just let them go and you'll be back at the breath. No matter how many times you leave the breath, just keep coming back. Each time you come back, reward yourself with a breath that feels especially good, so that the mind will be more inclined to want to come back. And then, of course, why stop with just one good breath? The more sensitive you are to how the breathing feels in the body, the more you can create a sense of comfort. Now, as the breath gets comfortable, there is a tendency sometimes to focus more on the comfort and to forget the breath, in which case you lose the foundation for your concentration. So to counteract that tendency, the next step is to breathe in and out aware of the whole body. And a good way of building up to that whole body awareness is to go through the body first, section by section, to see how the breathing feels in different parts of the body. Start down around at the navel. Start at the navel. Locate that part of the body in your awareness. Watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out. To see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. If you feel any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. So that no new tension builds up as you breathe in, and you don't hold on to any tension as you breathe out. Then move your attention to the solar plexus, the area right in front of the stomach, and follow the same steps there. 1, locate that part of the body in your awareness. 2, watch it for a while as you breathe in and breathe out to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. And then 3, if there's any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. Then move your attention up to the middle of the chest and follow the same steps there. Now bring your attention up to the base of the throat and follow the same steps there. Then bring your attention to the middle of the head and follow the same steps there. In this case, as you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering not only through the nose, but also through the eyes and the ears. In from the back of the head, down from the top of the head, going deep into the brain. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the head in all directions. Gently working through any patterns of tension you may feel around the forehead, the jaws, the eyes, the back of the neck, and dissolving those patterns of tension away. Now focus your attention to the back of the neck, right at the base of the skull. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there from the back, and then going down the shoulders, the arms out to the tips of the fingers, spaces between the fingers. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Now keeping your attention focused at the back of the neck as you breathe in. Now think of the breath energy going down both sides of the spine, down to the tailbone. Then as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the entire back into the air. Now bring your attention to the base of the spine. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there, and then going down through the hips, the legs, the feet, the toes. And then as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Now that completes one's survey of the body. If you're meditating on your own, you can go through the body again as many times as you like. But for right now, choose any one spot that seems most congenial to focus your attention. Allow it to settle there, and then from that spot, think of your awareness spreading out to fill the whole body. So you're aware of the whole body, breathing in, the whole body, breathing out. The range of your awareness may have a tendency to shrink, especially on the out-breath. So each time you breathe in, remind yourself, whole body. Each time you breathe out, whole body. And allow the breath to find whatever rhythm feels best. Your main duty right now is try to maintain this sense of centered but broad awareness, because it's healing for the body, healing for the mind. It's like a cream you put on your skin. It's not the case that you put the cream on and then you wipe it off. You put it on and you leave it there. So stay with this centered but broad awareness. Make it as solid and lasting as you can. No, I invite you to continue meditating while I give the talk. When I first went to stay with my teacher, Ajahn Thanissaro, I was a typical Westerner. I had lots of ideas about how things should be done. And he made it very clear that my Western ideas were not welcome. So then I took the opposite extreme. I said, well, I'll just do whatever I'm told. And then he started accusing me of not thinking for myself. So apparently it took him a while, and he realized that I was having trouble understanding how to live in a hierarchy and also how to live in what was basically an apprenticeship. So one day he told me a story of his dealings with Ajahn Lee, his teachers. A particular incident was when they were building an ordination hall at Wat Sukaram. And the pattern in Thailand is when you build an ordination hall, the Buddha image is on the west side of the hall facing east. And so they placed under the west end of the building a cornerstone in which they put Dharma texts, relics, Buddha images, other sacred objects, and sealed it up. And then as they were building the ordination hall, Ajahn Lee changed his mind. He decided to have the image placed on the eastern side of the hall, facing west. And Ajahn Thanissaro later said that he thought that it was because Ajahn Lee saw that Buddhism was going to go west. But anyway, when the building was done, they realized that the cornerstone now was under a part of the building where people would be walking over it. Now, you don't do that in Thailand. You don't step over sacred objects. So when someone pointed this out to Ajahn Lee, he turned to Ajahn Thanissaro and said, okay, tomorrow get the monks down under there and move it. And Ajahn Thanissara's first thought was, there's no way you can move that thing. It's a concrete box firmly planted in the ground. But he knew if he said that to Ajahn Lee said, well, if you don't have any confidence in me, I'll find someone who does. So the next morning, Ajahn Thanissaro got all the able-bodied monks and novices down under the ordination hall, and they had ropes and crowbars, and they pulled and they pressed and they tried to get the thing to move, and it wouldn't move. So after a day of doing this work and getting nowhere, Ajahn Thanissaro went to see Ajahn Lee, and he said, how about if we build a new cornerstone under the Buddha image, and open up the old cornerstone, and then take all the things in the old cornerstone and put them in the new one, and then seal that up. And Ajahn Lee, who was chewing some betel nut at the time, just shook his head, yes. And Ajahn Thanissaro ended the story by saying, this is how you show respect to your teacher. In other words, you do what you're told, and if it doesn't work, try to figure out why it's not working, and then go to the teacher with a question about your idea of how you might be able to make it work. So you're not placing all the responsibility on the teacher, you're taking responsibility yourself to figure out what's going wrong, what might be a good way of approaching it. And I've realized over the years that this is not only a lesson in how to show respect to your teacher, it's basically lessons in how to learn. You take instructions, you follow them, and if they work, that's fine. If they don't work, you've got to figure out, well, why are they not working? And you have to put some of your own effort into figuring this out. And put your own effort into trying to figure out what might work instead. And if you're with a teacher, you then might propose that to the teacher to see what the teacher has to say. If you're working alone, then you have to test things yourself. But it's through assuming that your work in the meditation, what you're doing is going to make a difference. And then judging what the results are, and if the results are not good enough, figuring out how you might change what you're doing so you can get better results. This is how you learn in any topic. This is specifically how you develop a skill. And this is basic to all the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha's not teaching us just concepts. He's teaching us skills. In his explanation of why we suffer, he says the basic list of causes goes down through craving and finally down to avijja, which is usually translated as ignorance, but it can also mean lack of skill. And so the way to get over your lack of skill is to be more observant about what you're doing. And then figuring out if you're satisfied with the results. and this is backed up in the analogies the Buddha gives for the practice. He never describes the practice or people in the practice as someone who's like drifting their way into nirvana or floating down to nirvana. You have to work. There's examples of people who are working at skills. A cook who knows how to figure out what his master likes. A carpenter who knows how to fix something that's broken. A warrior who knows how to fight in difficult situations. In other words, we're trying to master a skill here. It requires this assumption that, okay, what I do makes a difference. We're not here just to accept things as they arise and say, okay, yeah, everything, as the Buddha says, is impermanent, stressful, not self, so I should let go. The Buddha is asking you to basically push against those three characteristics. He's telling you to make a right effort to act in skillful ways, to abandon unskillful qualities, to get the mind into concentration so that you can have a good constant state of mind, or as constant as possible. These are skills that you have to work on. You can see this in his instructions to his son. There's one set of instructions that when the son was 7 years old, the Buddha comes to see him. And you get the impression that Rahula, the son, had told the lie that day, because that's the first topic the Buddha brings up. He takes a dipper of water that Rahula has set out, a little jar of water, takes a dipper of water, washes his feet, and then leaves a little bit of water in the dipper. And he says to Rahula, see how little water there is in this dipper? And Rahula says, yes. And the Buddha says, that's how little goodness there is in someone who can tell a deliberate lie with no sense of shame. Then he throws the water away. He says, see how that water's thrown away? Yes. That's how it happens to the goodness of a person who tells a deliberate lie with no sense of shame. It gets thrown away. They see how empty the dipper is? And the Rahula says, yes. He gets the message. So the Buddha starts out with the principle of truthfulness. You want to be truthful in what you do, say, and think, and not only truthful with other people, but also truthful to yourself. If you find it easy to lie to other people, it's going to be easier to lie to yourself, and you're never going to learn, you're never going to be able to observe. So being observant starts not only with just the ability to look at something, but it requires a quality of character, that when you can look at your actions and admit, yes, I have made a mistake. I am doing things wrong. And that's what the Four Noble Truths are all about. You're doing things wrong. We're looking for happiness, and what are you doing? You're holding on to things that are going to cause suffering. You desire happiness, and basically you find out that what you're clinging to and what you're craving is causing you suffering. And you have to take a noble attitude toward that. This is why they're called the Noble Truths. You don't just stick with your clingings and cravings. You learn to step back from them and observe them and say, okay, this is actually causing me suffering. I've got to change what I want. That requires a strong character, not just someone who's clever at a meditation technique, but someone who has good characters of the heart. This is reflected in the Buddhist statement that the people he was looking for as students were 1, honest, and 2, observant. The two qualities go together. These are the qualities you need in order to develop a skill. And so when he's talking to Rahula, he starts out with the principle of being honest. And then he goes on to talk about how to be observant and what to be observant of. This is where he's teaching what's called appropriate attention. He says, before you think of doing anything, either in terms of your thoughts, words, or deeds, ask yourself, what do you expect to be the results of this action? And you take responsibility for the action. You say, this action I want to do, what will be the results? You're not a passive observer. You have the choice. Am I going to do this or am I not going to do this? So you're assuming responsibility. You're assuming agency. And then if you foresee that it's going to cause any harm, you don't do it. If you do foresee harm, you don't do it. If you don't foresee any harm, you go ahead and do it. Now while you're doing it, you watch to see what results are actually coming out, because not everything has to wait to the next lifetime. It's not the case you stick your finger into the fire and then it's going to burn you in the next lifetime. It's going to burn right now. So you stick your finger to the fire and oops, you pull it out. Okay, if you see that while you're doing it is causing harm, you stop. If you don't see any harm, you can continue. And then when the action is done, then you look at the long-term consequences. And if you see that you actually did cause harm, then you make up your mind, I'm not going to repeat that mistake. And then you go talk it over to someone else who's more advanced on the path to get some ideas about how not to repeat that mistake. If you don't see that any harm was caused, then you take joy in the fact that you're progressing on your path, and then continue with this process. And the Buddha says that this is how people purify themselves in thought, word, and deed. This is how it's been done in the past, how it's going to be done in the future, and how you can do it right now. So here again, it comes down to not simply watching things, but also having some good character qualities, the character of compassion, you don't want to harm anybody. Integrity, you're willing to admit your mistakes, not only to yourself, but also to other people. So we're looking for not just someone who can do a technique, but someone who has good quality characters, good qualities of the qualities, good qualities of the character. Sometimes I find English a challenge. Then the Buddha goes on in a later sutta where he's also begins teaching Rahula meditation. And many of the same principles apply when you learn meditation. You focus on a topic, and then you see how is it going, and if it's not going well, what could you do to improve it? So it's you're not causing so much disturbance to the mind or any distraction to the mind. But the Buddha starts out with his instructions to Rahula by telling him to make his mind like earth. He says, just as earth doesn't react when things are thrown on it, you can throw trash on the earth and the earth doesn't shrink away. You could put perfume on the earth and the earth doesn't come up to receive it. It doesn't react. He says, try to make your mind like earth. Now for many people, that's where the meditation instructions stop. They say, just learn how to accept things as they are, that you can't change them, so you might as well not get yourself tied up in knots trying to change things that you can't change. But the Buddha doesn't stop there. And there's a good reason why. He's trying to get you to develop skills. He's going to have you use your powers of judgment. Sometimes we think that being non-reactive also means not judging. But in this case, the Buddha is teaching you to be non-reactive so that you can be a better judge of what you're doing. In other words, you make a mistake and you don't recoil from it and say, oh, I can't admit that I even did that mistake. You admit you made the mistake. You look at it straight on, and then you figure, okay, what have I done wrong? How can I learn not to do it again? So here we're being non-reactive for the sake of making better judgments. Because then, as I said, will then apply in the meditation and in the Four Noble Truths. In the meditation, the Buddha goes on from telling the Rahula to make his mind like earth, to talk about the different steps of breath meditation. And if you ever looked at the 16 steps that the Buddha teaches, we'll be discussing them on the retreat in a couple of days. They're very proactive. You don't just sit there and watch the breath and do whatever it's going to do. You make up your mind, I'm going to breathe aware of the whole, in and out, aware of the whole body. I'm going to calm the breathing. I'm going to breathe in a way that gives rise to rapture. I'm going to breathe in ways that gives rise to pleasure. The Buddha goes on to tell you that if there is a sense of rapture and pleasure, you try to get that to spread throughout the whole body. In the same way that when you mix flour with water to make dough, you're trying to get all the flour moistened. So you're trying to get everything in the body to have a sense of ease, a sense of pleasure. This doesn't happen on its own. You have to do it. It's a proactive process. Similarly, you breathe in ways that help to gladden the mind, that help to focus and concentrate the mind, to release the mind. The Buddha is teaching proactive meditation. And that kind of proactive meditation to work requires that you, again, assume that you have agency and that you can learn from your mistakes. So you don't have to keep repeating the same mistake over and over again. So he's trying to get you to develop your powers of judgment. Rather than just be non-judging, you have to learn how to be a better judge of what you're doing. So then you can apply these principles into the question of, how am I causing suffering? Where it is that I'm clinging to? And what do I crave? Why do I cling? Why do I crave? The Buddha says basically, when you find that you are causing suffering, and you can pinpoint what it is that's causing it. It requires 5 steps. The first step is just, let's see, okay, when I have an unskillful mental state, okay, what started it? What sparked it? And he uses the word origination. Where is the origination? It's something from within the mind. The Pali word is samudaya. And when the Buddha uses that word, he's not just talking about things arising and passing away. They arise because of a cause, and the cause does come from within. So for example, when you feel anger, your immediate response, your understanding of the anger, of course, is to focus in on who got you angry and why they deserve your anger. And you can justify all kinds of things to yourself that way. But the Buddha is saying, no, you have to look at what inside you that you're holding on to made you angry about that person. Because there's sometimes when people can do horrible things and you're not affected at all. And sometimes people can do good things and you hate it. Okay, what's going on? The cause comes from within. So you try to look for that. And then you try to see, does it last? And even though it may seem like you're angry for 24 hours, it doesn't last for 24 hours. You get angry and then it goes away. And then you can bring it back again. Now there's several reasons for this. One is that when you first get angry, there's a rush of hormones. And then maybe the thought of anger goes away, but then the hormones are still having their effect in the body. And you say, gee, I must still be angry. And so you pick it up again and you carry it through. Other times you just like being angry. There's a sense of power, there's a sense of release that can come with that. When you're angry, you can push aside all sense of shame, all sense of compassion. Just do and say what you want to do and say, without thinking about the consequences. Which, of course, is the Buddhist definition of stupidity. Not thinking about the consequences of what you're going to do. Remember what he told Rahula, 7 years old, think about the consequences. But when you're angry, you don't want to think about the consequences. Or you think that whatever comes into my mind, I can just run with it. First thought is not always best thought. So you need to remind yourself, okay, there are a lot of stupid things I can do. We're often told that a good antidote for anger is goodwill. There are times when the mind has trouble even having goodwill for itself. So I don't care, I just want to be angry. And this is where the Buddha has an alternative way of dealing with anger. He says, remind yourself that when you're angry, you tend to do stupid things. You say things that you think are clever, and then you realize afterwards, say, gee, I really wish I hadn't done that. So keep reminding yourself of the stupid things you've done under the power of anger. And then ask yourself, if I do something stupid like that, my enemy is going to be pleased. Now, do I want to please that bastard? That's not the word the Buddha used, but I found it really effective. And so you're using basically what ordinarily would count as an unskillful mental state, i.e. spite, and you use the spite to overcome your anger. So you want to look at, as I said, first, what is the origination, and then does the anger really last? There's a famous story in Thailand of Chakun Upali, who was a friend of Ajahn Mun's from Ajahn Mun's childhood, but who instead of going into the forest like Ajahn Mun, went into Bangkok and became a well-known monk in Bangkok. And he had a reputation for having a sharp tongue. And sometimes people went to him for the sake of the sharp tongue. As some of the wealthy people said, you just stay at home and nobody dares criticize you. Go to the monastery and have Chakun Upali criticize you. And you feel good. Well, there was this one case where this one woman went, and she was not expecting criticism. Her son had died, and she was really, really, really sad about that. Her only son, you can imagine, he died in his 20s. And as she went and told Ajahn Upali, ever since he died, I can think of nothing else except how much I miss him and how sad I am. And Chakun Upali said, you're just saying that to impress the people around you, to make them feel sorry for you. She was livid that he could say something like that. So she didn't even bow down. She left the monastery. Went back home, and about 2 hours after that, she realized in the 2 hours that she was angry in Ajahn Bali, she hadn't thought about her son at one thought. So she went back and she bowed down. So when something comes into the mind, and you say, I've been angry all day, or I've been fearful all day, or whatever, it's not really all day. It comes and goes, comes and goes. And then the question is, when it comes back, why do you dig it up? It's like a dog that buries some food and then digs it up and rolls in it again. Why are you doing this? And you'll find that there's something you like about that. Or in the case of fear, there's something that you're really attached to, and you really don't want to let go of that attachment. And so if you look, as the Buddha said, you look for the allure. What is that's attractive about it? And then this is going to require a lot of honesty. This is where we get into the qualities of the character again. Because sometimes we have our official reason for why we're angry, and then there's some unofficial reasons. And it's the unofficial reasons that are the real reasons. And you've got to learn how to dig those out. When you can see them, then you compare them with the drawbacks. Say, if I actually acted on this state of mind, where would it lead? Where do I expect it to go? And this is where the Buddha brings out the three characteristics as one of the ways of thinking about the drawbacks. That whatever you do, whatever seems positive you may get out of it, it's going to be inconstant, it's going to be stressful, it's not going to last, it's not worth holding on to. And when you can see that it's not worth holding on to, then you can let it go. So instead of just telling yourself, let go, you've got to see, why do I hold on? And what are the good reasons for not holding on? And when the good reasons for not holding on finally strike you as being more powerful than the reasons for holding on, then you can actually let go. And that's when you develop what the Buddha calls dispassion. You see that, okay, I've had enough of this. I've been putting all this effort into maintaining this unskillful state, and it's actually causing me trouble. Then you can let go. Now, to do this requires good, strong powers of concentration, both in the sense of the concentration of the mind and the concentration of your heart. You really do want to get beyond these things. And the Buddha says basically there are two ways of getting beyond an unskillful mental state. There are some unskillful mental states that cause suffering that will go away simply when you look at them with equanimity. They're the sorts of things that you give into without having really noticed what you're doing. And when you can stop to notice, oh, wait a minute, I'm doing this, and I don't see why I'm doing this, it makes no sense. You let go of those. Then the other things that, if you look at them, they just stare right back. They're perfectly content to be there. What are you going to do about it? This is where you have to exert what the Buddha calls a fabrication. And his way of explaining that basically comes down to how you breathe, how you talk to yourself, what perceptions you hold in mind. Now this again, we'll get back to how you breathe. You want to breathe to breathe in a calm way so you can pull yourself out of those hormone reactions that go along with a lot of the unskillful thoughts. And then you look, how am I talking to myself? Why am I saying that this is a good thing to hold on to? Looking for the allure. Can you talk to yourself in a new way where you see that the allure is not worth the drawbacks? And then you look for the perceptions. What are the sort of images that you hold in mind that kind of flit through the mind every now and then that would reinforce unskillful thoughts? Now to see those, you've got to get the mind into concentration. And even to look on things with equanimity. There's a kind of equanimity that the Buddha says lasts only for a short time, through your force of your will. Then there's the equanimity that comes from having developed a state of concentration. The first kind of equanimity can often be sort of defeatist and depressed. There's nothing I can do about this, I just might as well learn how to accept it. And the people who say, well, I actually saw someone say the other day, the secret to happiness is lowering your expectations. Which, wherever they got that, wasn't the Buddha. That kind of equanimity is very depressed. The equanimity the Buddha is recommending is the equanimity that comes when you're able to create a state of well-being in the mind. And then from that well-being, you can look at the other things in the world and they say, this doesn't have to touch my well-being at all. I can maintain my sense of well-being and still allow these things to change in ways that I would ordinarily not like, but they're beyond my power. My happiness is not threatened by them. That's the kind of equanimity the Buddha wants you to develop. So in both cases, it requires a good, strong concentration. It requires qualities not only of learning the techniques of concentration, but also the qualities of heart, the qualities of character, that allow you to step back from your attachments, step back from your cravings, step back from your clingings, and pass fair judgment on them, that these are really not worth it. So you can develop that sense of dispassion. A lot of people don't like the word dispassion. It sounds kind of gray and dull. But when the Buddha talks about dispassion, he always pairs it with freedom, release. In other words, you hold yourself down by the way you identify with your clingings, you identify with your cravings. When you don't define yourself by these things, then the mind gains a lot of freedom. When you're undefined. This is what happens as a result of dispassion. So it's a good thing. Learn to look at that. See it as an attitude of growing up. You've been playing your childish games, and now you realize that they are childish, and you can put them aside. So basically the Buddha's teachings are teachings on how to grow up and develop the qualities of character of a real adult, someone who can step back from his or her attachments and realize, okay, these are not worth it. I'd be better off without them. So those are my thoughts tonight about meditation as a skill and the qualities that are required for it.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Thanissaro, for that very insightful talk. I just want to express how grateful and fortunate I think I am to be able to meet you in person today, to benefit from your wisdom, your experiential wisdom. Thank you very much for your wonderful and incredible translations of the Dhammapada and the Sutta Pitaka made available to all of us, I think. I do have one question, Ajahn, I agree that it is incredibly important for us to be honest in our practice, to admit the mistakes that we've made, because at the end of the day, we are the owners of our actions, and to place wise attention on our actions as well, and our choices, to make better choices. But I guess at certain points in my life, there has been many moments where ego, for example, relying on ego or relying on certain unwise actions, certain defilements, letting defilements take over, actually led to positive outcomes, but in a worldly sense, and it is a little bit difficult to recondition the mind, especially as lay people. Still, I guess, working in the secular world and all. So, and sometimes we are also required to be assertive or to maybe even sell ourselves well to be able to, make an impact. So, Ajahn, what would be your advice for us to approach these issues with wisdom?
Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with selling yourself well as long as you don't lie. You're going to be presenting yourself as having certain character qualities. You really want to have those qualities, and that's perfectly fine. In the world, even in the Dharma, you have to be assertive sometimes. Like, I just showed up on Ajahn Fuang's doorstep, and I said, I'm going to study with you. And I knew that he didn't want to have a Western student. He'd actually tried to push me away once, but I came back again. So being assertive in and of itself is not a bad thing. But make sure that when you advertise yourself, there's no false advertising. And then when you go home, then you can say, okay, I have to, this is a personal quality that's really going to be useful in the working place, but it may not necessarily be useful when I'm dealing with other people in my family. I have to learn how to wear different hats. And what is required by this situation. And this is where it's good not to have a fixed idea of who you are. But more, the question is, should be, what is the skillful thing to do and say in this circumstance? And have a range. You just say, well, the way I do things is this way. Well, it's not always the best. When I went to stay with Ajahn Fuang, I had a dream one time. He had a hat. And then he went into his closet, and he came back, he had another hat. And then he came back and had another hat. And I looked in his closet, and it was filled with all these different kinds of hats. And so as I lived with him, I found that he had many different identities that he could assume. And so it's good to have a range.
Thank you very much, Ajahn.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the Dhamma talk. My question is related to one of the things you mentioned in the talk. Ajahn, you said the practice of mindfulness, sometimes people think it's non-reactive and non-judgmental, but that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes there needs to be the practice of trying to make good judgments. So I guess my question is twofold. Number one, I guess how did this misconception sort of arise about non-judgmentalism or being non-judgmental? And secondly, I guess, at least in my own observation and in my own practice, sometimes there needs to be non-judgmental. Sometimes there needs to be the practice of being non-judgmental and not being, I guess, reactive or not being biased or discriminatory in our likes and dislikes or preferences. And then sometimes there needs to be the act of making judgments and making evaluations. So I guess, first question, how did this misconception arise? What do you think? Second question is, the skill of making judgments, when do we know when to judge and when not to judge?
Okay, I'll answer your second question first. Is that there's a difference between being judgmental and being judicious. Judgmental is when you just jump to a conclusion without really taking the evidence in. And what the Buddha is teaching you don't want to be judgmental, you want to learn how to be judicious. And this is what, it takes time and it takes experience. You, again, by assuming, okay, I'm the agent here who's doing things that are going to have consequences, I have to learn how to judge my actions. When you learn how to judge your actions more fairly, then it's easier to judge other people's actions. As for how this came about, part of the problem comes from the fact that there's the Satipatthana Sutta is assumed to be a complete description of mindfulness practice. It's not. And the Buddha makes this clear by the way he sets up the very beginning of the sutta. He starts with the formula for mindfulness, which is, in the case, say, of the body, keeping track of the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Then he makes the same formula for feelings, mind, mental qualities. And then he starts asking questions. And if you've seen the book Skill in Questions, you realize that how the Buddha addresses a question is one of the most important things to figure out when you're trying to understand his teachings. And when you see a teaching, what question is he answering? Now, in the case of the Satipatthana Sutta, he asks questions only about one small part of that whole formula, which is, what does it mean to keep track of X? And he goes down to give whole lists of what it means to keep track of these things. As for what it means to be ardent, alert, mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, none of that gets covered. So there's a huge gap. He's focusing only on one issue in the larger context of mindfulness. But many people think that he's assuming the whole thing. So then when they get to the section on feelings, and the Buddha just lists feelings of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain, feelings of the flesh, feelings not of the flesh, doesn't say to do anything about them. Nothing is said to encourage or discourage them. Same with states of mind. There are skillful states of mind, unskillful states of mind. Nothing is said about what to do about them. So it's assumed, well, you don't do anything about them. You just know, oh, here they are, and then they go. One reason. And then that ardent, alert, and mindful, the word alert, sampajanya, or sampajano is alert, alertness is sampajanya. The commentaries focus on that as being referring to what they've translated into English as clear comprehension, where you see things in terms of the three characteristics. Now, when the Buddha explains sampajano or sampajana in the canon. It's simply knowing what you're doing while you're doing it. So there's nothing about the three characteristics, nothing about things, seeing things arising and passing away and being just okay with their arising, passing away. That's not there in the sutta. So those are some of the reasons. The other reason, which has more to do with Western thought, which is, if you've seen the book Buddhist Romanticism, there was a belief among the Romantics that the highest spiritual quality is this kind of being open to everything and not judging anything at all. And so there seemed to be a correspondence between what's being said in the Satipatthana Sutta and this belief that they've carried over from the Romantics. So that's what brought that together.
Right. So, Ajahn, if I understand you correctly, you're saying some of those questions are covered in the Satipatthana Sutta, and then some of those questions are covered elsewhere,
right.
in other suttas.
I've put together a book called Right Mindfulness, where I look to the other places where these concepts are explained, so to give a more complete picture.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Ajahn. I just want to say, I want to echo one of the earlier questioners. Your talks on YouTube, your writings and books have been really helpful. So thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Venerable Ajahn, for the inspiring Dhamma teaching. Brothers and sisters in the Dhamma, let us express our gratitude to Venerable Ajahn by saying Sadhu 3 times together.